So the MCU is currently going through quite the patchy period. There have been a few projects that a lot of us have enjoyed, and the odd ones that we've individually liked, but as a whole, there seems to be a declining quality and reception surrounding the films and shows we've recently had. We could put this down to multiple reasons, but I think what a lot of this comes down to is the loss of the cinematic touch that the studio once had. This idea of a cinematic universe and the recent issues that have stemmed from Marvel's ongoing multiverse story is something that I believe links into both the integral storytelling and the filmmaking that takes place. In this video essay, I'm going to be discussing the big cinematic problem of the MCU and giving you my thoughts on how it can be fixed as we lead into another phase of movies and TV shows. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my content surrounding upcoming movies and anticipated comic book releases, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. But without further ado, let's dive into the MCU's current cinematic problem. So there was a time where we were getting MCU after MCU movie, and each of them were either great or at least decent. During phase 1 to 3 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, each cinematic installment built towards a larger storyline that was being told, while still acting as great solo stories at the same time too. It also covered different genres of the comic book sphere, whether it be the traditional origin tales like with the early phase 1 movies, science fiction spectacles like with the Guardians of the Galaxy, superhero team-ups like that very first Avengers film, or the odd outlier like Captain America the Winter Soldier, which could also be viewed as half a political thriller. There was a variety of different characters and storylines, yet they all smoothly tied into the Infinity Saga, which became the eventual endgame against Thanos. There was a well-crafted plan by Kevin Feige, Marvel and co. to make something that continuously brought die-hard Marvel and comic book fans into theatres to watch where this would all lead. Now, I myself haven't always been the biggest fan of the MCU, and I'm typically more attuned to films from Marvel outside the universe, like with the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, the early X-Men films from Fox, or Logan, being the more unique takes on the genre. I got quite tired of seeing the same formulaic approach from a studio that had so much money and so much opportunity for deeper creativity, whether that be in storytelling or filmmaking. But at the same time, I can't lie in saying that I wasn't at least a bit fascinated by the extended storyline formula, and I definitely can't deny that individual films within that structure, whether it be the first Iron Man and some other phase 1 features, Guardians of the Galaxy, The Winter Soldier, or Avengers Infinity War, were quite brilliant. There was something for everyone in there, even if you weren't keen on a lot of the filmmaking approaches and features put to screen. So with this plan having been delivered on, the question for many Marvel and comic book film fans was, well, what's next? And then came phase 4, the beginning of the Multiverse Saga, which set out to give us quite the abstract Marvel storyline. While the MCU has creatively tried to explore new avenues here, the quality of the projects we've been getting since Endgame hasn't quite been up to standard or even resonated with film fans or fans of the MCU. I myself liked a good chunk of WandaVision, I liked No Way Home, I really liked Wakanda Forever, but a lot of the other movie and TV installments around that have not provided me with a consistent urgency to watch a long-term multiversal saga. At this very moment, it's all a bit of a mess, and I think this is because the MCU has either tired out or lost the idea of the cinematic from its very title. A few years ago, Martin Scorsese critiqued the MCU films, calling them theme park rides, and even other filmmakers provided their criticism for the recent unfilm-like qualities of the MCU. While at the time, I thought that some of these comments could have been worded differently or even analysed a more specific part of those comic book movies, I think in the years since, those comments have actually started to reign true in many different aspects. Alongside Scorsese's critique of the theme park structure, director James Cameron also added that the characters in these movies don't have the deepest of human relationships, that those characters don't really experience those true connections. Now, of course, these points are just subjective, and we all feel differently about how each superhero movie tackles characters and their relationships. And while I agree with both of these points to some degree, I don't think it's true of every comic book or MCU movie. But when looking at the recent MCU films, and specifically Phase 4 and 5, I think these arguments have become more accurate than not, and it ties into the studio's issues surrounding the cinematic nature of their very product. One element is the loss of cinematic storytelling, and the other is the integral filmmaking used to capture it. Starting with the storytelling, in my opinion, the recent stories of MCU projects have felt quite uninspiring, unoriginal, and unsatisfying. In particular, I feel like they've been stressing on familiar narrative beats or nostalgic sensibilities. For instance, with the recent Disney Plus shows, a few examples have opened with quite the strong idea. Whether it be Stephen Grant in Moon Knight, who deals with dissociative identity disorder, Wanda in WandaVision, dealing with her guilt while controlling the landscape of Westview, or an alternate version of Loki in the self-titled show, having been brought to the mysterious time variance authority, a body which exists outside of time and space and monitors the timeline of this whole universe. These ideas, while on paper provide the absolute potential, have ended up with generic large-scale conclusions. We didn't leave either of these shows with satisfying arcs or storytelling points, and the concluding episodes didn't put a strong enough marker down. They start off as being quite exciting in concept, but they didn't take a direction that seems any different from what's come before. In WandaVision, we had a generic CGI battle between Wanda and Agatha when the show began as an interesting traversal through the eras of TV and Wanda's deteriorating state. In Moon Knight, we ended again on an uninteresting battle when the show began in a much more compelling fashion. And then Loki had the opportunity to really do well with its multiverse story, but some episodes in and between really fell flat and didn't give us the greatest of answers. This has turned out to be the case with a lot of the Disney Plus MCU shows, and it's through a lack of consistency, narrative sense, or focus that we are questioning where this cinematic saga is really going. And when it comes to the movies, while we've had some good examples of nostalgia being used, like in No Way Home, the overarching multiversal story has felt quite forgettable. Along with this, the individual narratives themselves haven't really carried the weight that older MCU movies at least had. When you keep getting reminded of what came before, but then you can't successfully establish the new, or even the faces of this new MCU, it's hard for fans to really attach onto what you are doing long term through interconnected storytelling. Speaking of an interconnected, growing cinematic story, we haven't really had that yet either. The minute we establish something to do with the multiverse, like how it's opened, or who the threat is, e.g. Kang in Ant-Man, the MCU removes its built-up stakes. Between Loki, No Way Home, Doctor Strange, and Quantumania, the understanding of the multiverse's opening and the logical knowledge of how that works is currently way too muddied for us to put a clear idea of how everything is functioning. On top of that, when you begin to introduce the big threat of this next multiversal saga, you have to give the audience a reason to fear this figure, maybe even empathize with them, so that they care about the stakes at play. Building up to Avengers Infinity War, we got a sense of how Thanos was coming to really shake things up. And then when we eventually saw him in that movie, just in the space of an hour, we understand what his goal is and that he is going to cause some serious damage. Not just that, but the film tries to, at least in some regards, make us understand where he's coming from when he attempts to wipe out half the universe, even if that desire is one that we can't really align with as human beings. It did that to a successful degree and really established Thanos as an all-time villain. On the other hand, with Quantumania, I come out of that film feeling like they haven't really established the stakes at play with Kang the Conqueror, nor set up the interest for this next war. Don't get me wrong, he's my favourite part of that film, and the performance of Jonathan Majors really brings a sense of gravitas to what he could do going forwards. But the events, and especially the later events of Quantumania, diminish the hope that was set up. This villain that we and the characters are supposed to fear is one that is literally beaten by Ant-Man soon after he's portrayed as intimidating and almost undefeatable. The only consequences for the hero is that by the end of the movie, he doesn't think that the threat is completely over. Yes, it's all temporary, and other than quite a badly filmed post-credit scene that introduces the Council of Kangs, there's no real statement or reason so far to really feel the weight of Kang. Which with Thanos we got in the space of a few post-credit scenes and half a movie. This is just one primal example, but you can see a pattern here, and for me, that pattern is a lack of cinematic storytelling assigned to this whole multiversal saga. One minute we're building out the potential of the multiverse with numerous versions of characters, a new big bad, and branching timelines. The next minute we're intercutting it with separated storylines, whether it be the Celestials in Eternals, who we haven't heard much of since, the extended grief of Wanda, which is stalled for the time being, or dealing with loss in Wakanda Forever. Now, these separated storylines are the ones that have appealed to me a lot more than the others because they have actually told their narratives in a much more compelling way, and the filmmaking has been a big step beyond the other entries. The traditional MCU fare with, say, Quantumania, Multiverse of Madness, or Thor Love and Thunder has become a somewhat unbalanced prelude to everything they're building towards, and it hasn't acted as crucial storytelling stepping stones like the more conventional MCU films did during the Infinity Saga. When we're getting new faces and returning heroes not convincingly portrayed, it all feels like it's acting as more product that they can squeeze for the sake of the Marvel brand, rather than focusing on making great cinematic films to begin with. Yes, there's been the potential of good villains here and there, whether it be Kang, Wanda, or Gore, and there's been some decent performances for those characters, but at the same time, there's been weaker motivations when it comes to the threat that they should be bringing. Combine this problem with the jarring tones within each of the individual movies, and it really disrupts the potential or excitement surrounding this entire saga. These storytelling issues have now become obvious to a lot of viewers, and a big part of that can stem from a writing problem. The scripts have not encouraged the most promising of performances or dialogue in given scenes, and I think a lot of this has to do with reoccurring writers within the Multiverse Saga who aren't given enough time to really flesh out what they write. For instance, Michael Waldron and Jeff Loveness are two writers typically connected to a lot of the Multiverse Saga thus far. Now, I believe that these two writers can produce some really great scripts for the MCU, but the sheer number of projects that they've been working on, and the fact that they will now have to write both of the upcoming Avengers films, is an uphill climb right from the get-go. The Russo brothers, who did a great job with Captain America the Winter Soldier, Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame, had time to work with their writers Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFreely, but more importantly, there was a clear idea of the storytelling structure that would evolve as we built towards those films. Yes, they could bring their own style to those movies, but they also knew what they had to do to keep in line with the pre-planned arc. With the MCU already struggling in its multiverse saga to really give us a clear identity or optimism for where this story is going, that's a lot of pressure on the backs of two writers who of course would want to make the best possible Avengers films. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt going into those projects because we've seen other writers and filmmakers make huge leaps from not so good projects to great ones, but I can't deny that that is worrying, having just come off the backs of their recent work, which has guided Phase 4 and the start of Phase 5. I could talk at greater lengths about the storytelling issues of the MCU, but as I mentioned before, it's multiple facets that bring us the completed projects we've seen. And the other main issue that I have surrounding the current decline of the MCU, if you will, is the filmmaking involved. When looking at the recent installments, I think one of the main glaring issues is that the recent cinematic films contain this soap opera effect that is finding its way across their big screen IMAX blockbusters. The scripted scenes and visual filmmaking of, say, Ant-Man 3 or Thor: Love and Thunder, which are $200 million budgeted blockbusters, have not been captured in a way that demonstrates the scale that these movies are supposed to have. Rather, at times they feel more like Disney Plus productions converted into the next product of big screen entertainment. The green screen is again a problem within recent films, but rather than being distracting in a few scenes, it's a good chunk of the running time that is filled to the brim with badly composed shots, poorly lit frames, or unfinished and extensively bad CGI. I did have this issue with some of the older MCU movies, but it's become more glaringly obvious and even laughable at times with the new endeavours. Whether it be the example of MODOK, or the floating head in Love and Thunder, or even the climactic action scenes of movies such as with Black Widow. There have been some good examples of finalised shots in MCU features, such as one scene in Eternals, and that's mainly because there's a minimal use of it and they've combined CG with footage shot in real-world locations. But at the same time, there have been mounting examples that lean more towards the bad side of CGI use, and it impacts things not just from a visual perspective, but also from a storytelling one too. You really want to feel the weight of the storylines on screen, the presence of the character at an integral moment, or believe in the emotion that's a part of the narrative. But how can you take it seriously or invest in the new saga when unfinished visuals and frames are rushed into the final cuts of features? We've gone from the great use of computer and practical imagery in films like the first Iron Man, superb choreography in practical fights like in The Winter Soldier, and detailed mocap and CGI work in Avengers Infinity War with Thanos, to, well, what we have now. Before Quantumania came out, it was claimed that the film was using the volume tech, which, if you don't know, was the same technology that they used to capture the stunning backgrounds of 2022's The Batman, or the recent Disney Plus Star Wars show, The Mandalorian. The trailer for Quantumania promised stunning vistas and hopefully a new era of visual effects in a Marvel film in an aim to remove that stigma against their green screen problem. But after watching the film, you wouldn't even realise that they used the volume tech, because the same issues of unfinished CG, bad lighting, and shadows in and amongst subjects and backgrounds was still present. Not just that, but like with the example of MODOK, actual characters are visualized and presented in such a bad way. When you go and watch IMAX movies, you expect it to look, feel, and sound like a large-scale blockbuster experience, especially when you pay double the admission price. But recent MCU films just haven't kept up with the visual or detailed breakthroughs in filmmaking that other blockbusters or even other comic book movies have applied. Blockbusters like The Batman, Top Gun Maverick, Dune, and even Avatar: The Way of Water have shown that you can make today's IMAX films look authentic and sound stunning. It's the aim to either realistically film in locations or use the volume tech and then combine that with the aid of computer imagery to enhance that realism already captured. So how do all of these mentioned issues combine into one cinematic problem? Well, the main issue that I think seems to be affecting all of this is Disney and Marvel Studios' big push for quantity over quality. The success of the MCU is no understatement, but in recent times we've gone from 2 or 3 cinematic films a year to almost 4 films and 4 TV shows every single year. That alone doesn't just start to fatigue the audience, but it also puts stress on filmmakers, creatives, writers, and ultimately VFX artists to give us a polished final product. Now, I can't speak for everyone or every single project, but for me personally, I feel drained watching a lot of the recent movies or shows because I don't get a sense that there's this importance or high creativity that there once was. The communication that we've gotten from recent MCU releases is that we are going to be getting more and more, all serving as product rather than anything remotely connected to elevating the cinematic experience within the comic book genre. We're still dealing with the post-Endgame snap, we're still stressing on the coolness and nostalgic presences within the multiverse, and we're still dealing with the hero beating the villain in a climactic, over-CGI'd final act. Regardless of all of these issues and a culminating cinematic decline though, I think there are ways that this can be fixed. Maybe not straight away, but in the long term, I do believe that the MCU can produce better results, and like I was suggesting before, I think they need to focus on quality over quantity. In my opinion, the soap opera effect and feel of the Disney Plus shows is extending to the cinematic movies, and I think it needs to end soon. Just by decreasing to 2 movies a year and 2 shows a year, for instance, that may dramatically help in giving everyone on productions, everyone on the writing sides of things, and the visual effects guys more time to produce the best stories and projects that feel more cinematic in this new phase of Marvel. If you're going to use the same visual effects company or the same writer across numerous projects, give them more time to really deliver on the vision of the creatives. The recent comments of Bob Iger do suggest that they are looking to do just that, and hopefully it's for the better. He did mention that it's time to focus and really establish the new faces of the MCU, and while some were disappointed to hear that, I think regardless of character, it's just about making each movie a lot better. Whether it's old or new characters involved, there needs to be more focus on the films themselves rather than the product or character name being the central consideration. If a creative has a good idea for a small or even a well-known Marvel character, and they as a studio believe in that vision, then work with them and give them the time to make that the best possible movie it can be. Right now, there's just too much going on both behind the camera and in front of it, and getting a sense of clarity and time to really deliver with the individual films will help everything in the future that much more. But that was my video essay discussing the current big cinematic problem of the MCU. I'm hoping that Marvel can spend a bit more time to really focus on each of their individual projects in the future, and that they can start to really establish the identity of what this multiverse saga really is. Again, I think a quick way to begin fixing it is by focusing on a bit less and making the films and shows that they do put to screen more detailed through both the storytelling and the filmmaking involved. It will allow more time for the cast and crews to really produce some standout comic book films, and it could even rectify the big issue that many people currently have with the MCU, and that is the unpolished state of these big budget IMAX presentations. Still, as with everything, I hope that it can be great in the future, and hopefully the recent criticisms from many, including myself, can lead to much better results. But what are your thoughts on the recent projects in the MCU, and like myself, do you think that they need to re-establish a cinematic identity, especially in their theatrical films, and really focus a lot more on the quality of them? Let me know down below in the comment section. For much more videos and news on the latest films and upcoming comic book movies, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.